Hey, welcome back to Prizefights podcast. I'm Josh. This should be a quick podcast. We want to talk about a few fights tomorrow, Saturday, June 16th, and also want to make some follow-up comments to my last podcast about post-fight Pacquiao-Bradley. One thing I said in that podcast was that I was impressed at Timothy for digging down deep and overcoming what appeared to be a lack of stamina. It seemed that I thought he was out of gas in the third or fourth round, and you saw him in the corner, and he had his head hanged down low, and he was just out of it, and his corner was trying to pump him up. I think that what we know now is that he had a pretty severe ankle injury in the second round. He now has torn ligaments in both ankles and has been in a wheelchair. So I think what we had there was not a Timothy Bradley out of gas and ready to quit. We had some guy who was really frustrated and probably really concerned and nervous about not having his feet under him. If you have a broken ankle and or sprained ankle, I think one was swollen, one was fractured. That's a bad thing when you're in the ring with Manny Pacquiao. And for him to overcome that and to still put in some competitive rounds, I had him winning the last three rounds. I had Tim winning the first two and the last three. But that's pretty impressive. So some have made the comment, well, how would he have done if he had fresh feet? That's a good question. If he was impressive with two bad feet, that fight's an interesting fight if he's fresh. Again, I gave Pacquiao the fight 115-113. I agreed with Jerry Roth. I had it a lot closer than the rest of the boxing globe. But I watched it from Top Rank streaming, and that's just what I saw. I need to watch it again from the HBO telecast, as I mentioned in the last podcast, but just wanted to reset that issue and to follow up with some comments regarding Pacquiao-Bradley. It's starting to die down a little bit, but there's still some talk about it on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, I love Twitter. I've met some really good boxing guys on Twitter. We've talked a lot about Pacquiao, Bradley, NBA, Mike Tyson. So thanks for the good conversation, fellow tweeters. And follow me at Josh Paul Cloud on Twitter if you want to. And at prizefights.us, we have links to our YouTube site and our Facebook page. You can follow us there. The YouTube site's new. I figured that I'd try to reach some more people with the podcast because the podcast is available on prizefights.us. But a lot of people use the Apple iPhone, and I hear that phone has issues with Flash players, and my podcast uses a Flash player. So I want to reach more mobile people and more iPhone people, more Apple people. So I've got my podcasts, I think there's 10 of them now, that are also on YouTube. It's just audio, no video, but that way the YouTube links for my podcast can be accessed by any browser, computer, phone, etc. So check that out. Getting on to the fights that are happening tomorrow on June 16th. The big one is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is fighting Andy Lee. And what makes this fight really intriguing, beyond the fact that both fighters are good fighters, and that's a hard fight to pick, in my view, even though Lee is the underdog, is the trainers. This is Freddie Roach versus Emmanuel Stewart, the two best trainers, I think, hands down, in the game. And I love Freddie Roach. I'm a big Freddie Roach guy. But I might love Stewart a little bit better. I love to listen to that guy's analysis on HBO when he calls fights. I just like the way he works. He wants fighters to let their hands go. He doesn't want to see a fight that doesn't end in knockout. He always wants a knockout. That's probably why Chad Dawson dropped him. I thought, he kept on telling Chad, let your hands go, let your hands go. But Chad just doesn't let his hands go. He thought Chad had the ability to be a knockout fighter, and probably does. He's heavier fisted than most people think he is. But you gotta love Emmanuel Stewart's training style. He did a good job with Cotto. Got Cotto using his jab again and made his foot work a lot better than what it had previously been. Even though he's not with Cotto anymore, he does good work with fighters, and I think that he's predicting a knockout. So, Freddie Roach, of course, is confident in his fighter, Julio Cesar Chavez. I just don't think that a guy that throws those big, long, telegraphed punches like Chavez Jr. is going to be able to withstand the punching power of Andy Lee. I've got Andy Lee in an upset, and I'd like to see him knock out this paper champion, Chavez Jr. I was a big fan of Chavez Sr. That's Mike Tyson and Julio Cesar Chavez in the late 80s. Those are the guys that got me watching boxing. I was a kid, but my dad and my brother started a tradition of watching those two guys on HBO. And every time Tyson fought, we watched it. And we also liked Julio Cesar Chavez. He was a warrior. But I think he's head and shoulders above his son, even though his son does have 1 million fights under his record and he's undefeated. He's got 1 draw. He's been protected. Chavez Sr., not so much. He fought everybody. He fought the best. Love Sr., not so much Jr. I hate to pick against a Roach fighter. I don't think there's any other Roach fighters I don't like. I like all of his fighters except for that one. Just not a fan of his fighting style and the fact that he's been protected so much. His best fight, I mean, who has he really fought? He fought Rubio, an old Rubio, and did pretty well. He was impressive. I have to give him that. I want to see him fight some other people and quit drinking while he's training. And so watch that fight. That's the main event on HBO tomorrow. And also, on NBC Sportsnet, you've got Thomas Adamic fighting Eddie Chambers. And Adamic, I believe, is a 2-1 favorite in that fight, and I think for good reasons. He's a better boxer. You got to watch out for the punching power from Eddie Chambers, but I think that Thomas Adamic has adjusted well as a heavyweight, and he's a smart fighter, and he's got a lot of tenacity too. Remember the fight he took on against Chad Dawson in light heavy. So here's Thomas Adamic getting really outboxed every single round by Chad Dawson, and yet he still hangs around. And in the last round, maybe it was the 11th round, he dropped Chad Dawson because Chad got sleepy. The point is, Thomas Adamic is going to be there every round, and Eddie Chambers is a I'm not really sure he's going to be in the kind of shape that can put up with that. We know Thomas is going to be in shape. So I've got Adamic winning that fight. And also, another fight that's on the undercard of the Adamic-Chambers fight is Bryant Jennings, American heavyweight. And he's fighting Steve Collins for a 10-round heavyweight match. And that's also a fight we should follow. America has really needed, and I think boxing has really needed, another great heavyweight champion. We haven't had that since Mike Tyson. Some people are thinking maybe Jennings is that guy. He's 27 years old. He's only been fighting since 2009. I think he had aspirations to be a football star initially, and then later realized that he wanted to walk into a gym and start fighting, and he was very good. And he's undefeated. And he goes for about 6'2", 220. So not a huge heavyweight, but he's getting the job done. And I think as an American, we need to follow that guy and root for him and hope he does well tomorrow night. His record is 13-0. He has 6 knockouts. He fights from an orthodox position. He has a reach of 84 inches. Again, 6'2", about 220. And he's 27 years old. So he's right there in his prime. And we'll see how he does tomorrow against Steve Collins at the Prudential Center in New York, New Jersey. And by the way, this is for the vacant USBA heavyweight title. And we should have some good boxing tomorrow. Some two good heavyweight bouts. Steve Collins and Bryant Jennings, and Thomas Adamic, Eddie Chambers. You know, I want to say one last thing. This is an ad hoc podcast. I apologize, but I was thinking today, I tweeted something about there's a fight coming up with Hasid Rahman and Alexander Povetkin. That's I think it's in July. And Povetkin is an 11-1 favorite over Hasid Rahman, and that just reminded me of Lennox Lewis, because Rahman, I believe, was the first guy to knock out Lennox Lewis, to beat Lennox Lewis. And I want to use that as a segue just to talk about Lennox Lewis real quick. If there's one fighter that was underrated and didn't get the credit that he deserved, it's Lennox Lewis. Maybe that's because he's a British fighter and he wasn't an American heavyweight. But this guy was an outstanding Hall of Fame caliber fighter. He only had 2 losses, and he avenged those 2 losses by knockout. And it really disappoints me when all these top 50 and top 100 fighters lists come out, and you don't see him mentioned. You see Mike Tyson mentioned, like number 50 or so, but you don't see Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis knocked out Mike Tyson. Lennox Lewis avenged both of his losses by knockout. Lennox Lewis beat Klitschko, Vitaly Klitschko. I know Vitaly was up on the scorecards, but the credit goes to Lennox Lewis for busting that eye open. It was stopped because of the eye injury. Lennox Lewis was, and I'll just say this, I'm a Tyson fan. I love Tyson. He got me involved in the sport. If it weren't for Mike Tyson, I wouldn't watch boxing. I love that guy. I'm his biggest fan. But Lennox Lewis is the best heavyweight of our generation. I'm talking last 20 years. You've got to say that. He didn't go through people like Tyson did and blow them up, but he had stiffer competition. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see that fight earlier. I would have loved to have seen Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson fight when they were younger. Tyson, by the time he fought Lennox Lewis, he was a head case and wasn't training as well. He lost that head movement and he got rocked. But all credit to Lennox Lewis for being, as I said, I think the best heavyweight of our generation. Well, that's all I have. I apologize for the sound quality. I've been recording the last few podcasts from my Android phone and then editing it and compressing it again so it loses quality. But in the future, I'll start recording this with better sound quality. So watch those 3 fights and let me know what you think about the podcasts. Thanks for listening to Prizefights Podcast. Check us out on prizefights.us and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll see you next time. Thanks.